Deleting is also pretty straightforward. In products, here we have our delete product method. And of course there, I also want to send a request, an HTTP request. The URL for that will be the same URL we used for updating, because of course I want to target an element with a specific ID. And then we can send a delete request here to that URL. Now you don't need to add any body here, and actually you can't, because there is no data you would need to append. You just want to delete the resource at that URL, and that's all. And of course now you can also again use async await here if you want to, but you can also do something which is known as optimistic updating. Here I'm executing this, and I actually don't await the result. Instead, I immediately execute this because, as you learned, Dart does not block code execution until this is done, and it simply moves ahead to this line before we have a response from this line. And therefore it will remove that item from our items list. Now actually, I'll do something which is totally optional, but which is also a pattern you see from time to time. Before I remove my item here, and actually before I start sending the request therefore, just to be safe, I'll copy it. So I'll create a new final variable, existing product, and there I want to get the first product where this condition here essentially is true. Or, since I'll need to remove it later, we can also simply get the index. So maybe get the existing product index first, and we get this with the help of items, and then index where, and now use our function here to identify a product. So this gives us the index of the product we want to remove. Then I'll add my existing product constant here, runtime constant, which is items for that existing product index. So with that, I now basically store a reference, a pointer to that product which is about to be deleted in this constant here. And thereafter, I can call items remove at, because I now have the index, existing product index. So this will now remove the item from the list, but important, not from memory. It only removes it from the list. The item, the object itself, will live on in memory. Dart would normally clear it from memory if it finds no one who's still interested in the data, which would normally be the case if you remove it from the list. But here, since I stored a reference to the product, an existing product, we still have someone interested in the existing product, and therefore we still keep that product. We only remove it from the list, but in memory it's still stored, and we still have a reference to it here. So then I sent that delete request, and now I'm only interested in when that failed. So we could use async await, but we can also use catch error here. And if an error occurred, I don't really care about the error. I can use an underscore therefore. I just want to roll back the removal here. So then I will use items and then use insert, and insert at my existing product index, which is the index the product was at before, and insert my existing product there. I can do that because existing product, this constant, holds a reference to the old product. So I will reinsert it into the list if we failed here. This is optimistic updating because this ensures that I re-add that product if we fail. Now if we succeed, so in then before catch error, I don't care about the data I get. There I simply want to set existing product equal to null, and therefore this of course shouldn't be a final. I'll use var instead, simply to clear up that reference and let Dart remove that object in memory, because now really no one is interested in it anymore. So with that we have that optimistic updating pattern where I roll back if my product deletion should fail. And of course I want to notify listeners after that rollback as well. Now let's see whether that worked, and for that I'll reload my app here and then go to manage products, and in there let me quickly add a dummy product because I don't want to delete one of the other two products which are at least a bit more realistic. So this is a dummy product. Let's add it here, save this, and I want to delete that, so the test product here. If I click the trash button here, It's gone and it stays gone. And on Firebase, you see it's not there anymore. Now let me add an error here. Remove the JSON at the end again. It's a classic. Refresh here. And add another dummy. Another dummy here. And now this should actually fail to be deleted. So adding, of course, works. But now if we delete this, it should disappear because we're not waiting for that request to finish. We immediately remove our items. And by the way, we would also immediately remove it if I moved that after HTTP delete, as you learned, because Dart doesn't wait for this to finish before it runs that. So it will not wait for that. And hence it should now remove that. But we'll then face an error and it should be re-added. So let me delete that. But that's not happening. The logic here is correct. The only thing is that delete, unfortunately, does not throw an error if we get an error status code back from the server. Now, the way the web works is that the server sends back status codes to tell us whether the operation succeeded or not. And typically you have 200 status code, most importantly 200 and 201, which signal that everything worked. You have 300 status codes, which signal that you were redirected. You have 400 status codes, so you have different values there, just as for 200 and 300, which signal that something went wrong, and 500 codes basically do the same. And of course, there is some differentiation. If you want to learn more about that, attached you find a list of available status codes and what they mean. And for GET requests and also for POST requests, the HTTP package we're using automatically throws an error if we have a status code that is greater or equal than 400. So for all these error status codes, it throws an error and we make it into catch error. For delete, it does not do that, and therefore we end up in the then block. I can prove that if I add a response here, which is the value we would get here, and I print response. Excuse me, not response, but response status code. If we do that, and we tried it again, I reload. My data is here because it was stored. If I delete here, then you see 405 is printed. That's the status code we're getting, and that signals that an error occurred. Now, normally, again, for GET and POST, the HTTP package would have thrown an error, and our code here would have kicked off. Here, that is not happening. And therefore, I want to throw my own error if that's the case. So we can basically check if response status code is smaller than 400, is greater or equal than 400, which means something went wrong. And in that case, I want to throw my own error and not continue with this code.